Wisp Sports Radio, the voice of women in sport.
Hello and welcome to Transcending Sport here on Wisp Sports. This is Season 2, Episode 5, and I'm Chris Stafford. On Transcending Sport, we share the stories of girls and women's organisations around the world, from campaigns to individuals, as well as media and academia, who are working to improve access and opportunity, as well as equality and diversity for girls and women in sport. And joining me today is someone who is standing up and speaking out for women and girls in Australia. She is academic and activist Nadia Bevan, who recently wrote an article on women's sport and why it matters, in which she made the case for why this is a momentous time for women's sport. Nadia shares her perspective on where sport for women is in Australia, with many of the same challenges faced elsewhere. And she also explains why keeping girls and women active is critical, and the need to understand the social, cultural, psychological, and economic factors that contribute towards that. Nadia is passionate about creating inclusive sporting environments for all, in particular girls and women, and she's worked on a number of projects that strive towards reducing barriers for sport and physical activity participation for girls and women, youth, and the LGBTQ+ community. Nadia grew up in Adelaide and recently moved to Melbourne to undertake her PhD at Monash University after working on a gender equality in sport and recreation project in regional Victoria. Nadia, welcome and thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
And tell us a little bit about where you are now studying.
So I'm currently studying at Monash University in Melbourne, and what I'm looking at is, or a number of different things actually. I'm looking at, first of all, physical activity in sport and why people may be avoiding it, particularly women, why they may not be being active essentially or participating in sport, but also just looking at overall those barriers to inclusion, so with a particular lens on girls and women. So in the sporting context, why are women not participating? What opportunities are they potentially lacking? What sort of social and cultural structures are in place in clubs, in the club environment, that could potentially be a barrier for women to participate in sports? And even just in terms of like the language used, what sort of language is being used that potentially could deter or make someone not feel welcome within a club or feel included. So there's a number of different things that I'm currently looking at, or we at Monash are looking at, which is very exciting, and we're taking more of a empirical approach, so looking really at a larger number of people, and then sort of getting down into the narrative of the people within these clubs as well, so that we can take that sort of multi-level approach of, okay, what are the masses experiences, and then what are also the stories that are occurring, and the lived experience of these people as well.
Well, what caught my eye was your article there, Nadia, Women's Sport, Why It Matters, that you published on the university website, I think a couple of weeks ago, was it?
Yeah, yes.
And that was really quite extensive. You dug into various topics there, and all of which, of course, very relevant today. And I think it's not just Australia. This is a global issue, isn't it? I mean, I'm interested into what extent you feel some of the issues are really burning, that you're burning a hole in your in your bandwidth right now. What do you feel that if you had to pick one that you really needed to focus on right now, or is that too big a question? Are there too many?
Oh, I was gonna say, Chris, that's a big question right there. I think that's why you said that in the article I touched on a number of topics, and that's because I couldn't just pick one, because there's so many factors that influence participation in for women. So how can we just focus on one, or know at this stage what the biggest, I suppose, impact is, because there's so many. And I think if I had more words, I would have kept writing and writing and writing, because there's so many factors that we could talk about. But I think for me, my sort of approach is definitely a public health approach. So how can we get as many women active as possible? Why aren't women being active? And as well, just really that we understand that it has, being active in general has a positive impact on both your physical and mental health, and in terms of then social, emotional health and well-being. So for me, it's really looking at, okay, how can we start to look at getting women who aren't being active, but then those women that are dropping off, or as children, we have such a big participation rate. It's basically equal globally. It's almost equal to boys. So boys and girls are very, very active. But then that starts to decline as you're reaching adolescence. And then even throughout the lifespan, that's still, both in sport and physical activity, though that level of participation declines. So that means that's impacting our physical health, which obviously has a number of then both individual but that structural, economic impacts as well within our society. So I think in most of Western society, really, and then also that mental or that psychological, that impact that it has on our mental well-being, because that is quite prevalent, and especially for young women, we have such high rates of depression, of anxiety, of even attempted suicide, that it's quite disconcerting. So how can we actually use physical activity to try and address some of those issues as well? And I think that's the lens that I'm trying to take. But at the same time, there's once again so many factors that influence participation, especially in sport. The structural, the historical elements, the cultural elements, the social elements. How can we look at some of those? And I think I was trying to sort of touch on those as well, to look at, okay, there are so many factors. What are the factors that we can look at and potentially address as well? Is it, what can we actually start to change within our society? And like you said, I don't think it's just I think that state is quite prevalent, not just in Australia, but in other Western cultures as well.
Yeah, the other problem we find, the people that we talk to around the world, is keeping girls in school, the retention in sport, in the retention of, over here, middle school. So you're looking at, the mid-teens, maybe late teens, when they have so many choices these days, and they get distracted. And if they leave sport, then do they ever come back? When do they come back? So what evidence have you found in Australia of that issue, that problem of retaining girls in sport?
Oh, yeah. I honestly, 100% the same. It's girls around that age will be leaving sport, and if anything, they'll go into physical activity. But then if you look at the trends, there's still a large gap between those that are leaving sport and not necessarily continuing to be active. So retention, and it's funny because no matter who you sort of talk to, that's one of the key problems, is how do we retain girls in sport? And I don't think there's at this stage a current solution. So if you have any, if you know of anything, then let me know. But if we can answer that question, that would be a huge win, because it is problematic, and it is worrying about the different influences that girls have, I suppose, at that developmental stage. Adolescence is so pivotal in terms of also creating those lifelong healthy behaviours. So how can we actually keep girls involved? And currently it is definitely in Australia a very similar state of play, essentially, that the girls are dropping out and they're not continuing to be active, and I'm not sure if they're necessarily getting back into it later in life or not, which would be fascinating to research actually, because I'm not entirely sure there is research here anyway about that, unless you're aware of any, Chris.
No, and when I think one of the issues that we seem to find around this is making it a social event for girls. It's just because it seems to me that if they feel they're socializing, that's an incentive for them to stay in sport, right?
Definitely. That social aspect, from everything that I've read and all the research that I've conducted, it definitely would be the key driver for girls to be participating in sport. For girls and women, I would say.
Well, of course, as an expat, I'm familiar with the leading sports, right? Your cricket, your soccer,
Yes.
and your AFL, and the mainstream sports. But talk a little bit more about the numbers behind those, and which you find in the research you've done, Nadia, where girls are mostly gravitate to.
Well, I would say currently Australian rules football, so AFL, would be one of the highest rates. So to give a little bit of context, the professional or semi-professional league started 4 years ago in Australia. So the AFLW commenced 4 years ago, and since then there has been an influx of participation for girls and women in football, which has been really interesting because, and I don't think, as far as I'm aware, there's no research which says, okay, are these girls and women new to sport in general, or are they coming from other sports and it's an opportunity for them that they haven't yet had to play this sport that is actually, quite large in Australia, but specifically in Victoria, it's sort of almost a cultural right within Victoria to watch and participate in football. So, or in footy, as we call it here. So I would say that would be one of the leading participation sports at the moment for girls and women. However, it's really interesting because, like you said, soccer and cricket are also very large, and they are global sports, and professionally, they've also, come a long way in terms of recently, they've signed basically for equal pay, which is huge. That's a massive step within the sporting context, the professional sporting context for women. So those sports also have relatively stable numbers in terms of participation for girls, and be interesting to see in the future how that changes, or how football, or footy, I should say, impacts those participation numbers as well, because they would be sort of the three leading sports in participation currently for girls and women, with football sort of having this massive influx, which is really, really fascinating. But also there's a high injury prevalence in that sport as well. So how's that going to have impacts for the future as well within the coming years? And that'll be really interesting to see, and to be able to see play out, and see as well if then this sport has created an opportunity for girls who haven't been active before to be active in a sport that's quite sort of different and quite culturally unique, I suppose, for Australia, and how, that continues to impact them participation in general.
Now, what about rugby and field hockey? Is they come a pretty close sort of, they'd be in the top 10, wouldn't they? Certainly.
Yeah, they would be. Yeah, rugby, and once again, in terms of within Australia, it depends on where you're situated, so where you're geographically located, as to what your top sports are. So in New South Wales and Queensland, rugby is definitely the top sport, I would say, or in terms of both following the sport and also then participation. And rugby it has had an incline as well of participation for girls and women. Hockey, as far as I'm aware, is actually relatively stable in terms of participation, but it's one of those sports that's sort of, well, I would say stable is probably the best way to describe it. It's always there in terms of success from our elite teams where we're, relatively successful, and it's a sport that has, from the initiatives that they do, is a fairly sort of inclusive and gender neutral sport, so that both women and men have the same sort of opportunities within the sport, which is fantastic. So that they are definitely sports that are consistently, I suppose, doing well in terms of hockey. And then rugby, the girls and women, the opportunities for them have in recent years increased actually quite a bit. So the participation has also been increasing as well, in New South Wales, Queensland in particular.
Yeah, because it's accessible in schools, right? So they do have quite a few choices there. Now, let's move on to gender equality, because I know you're passionate about that too, Nadia.
I am, yes.
And we've seen some really good examples of governing bodies of sports in Australia really stepping up, and with the netball, we didn't mention netball, of course, but netball, cricket, there are two wonderful examples, and now with the Matildas, the soccer team, there's some good examples of Australia leading the way when it comes to equal pay.
Yes, yeah, they've
or at least improving pay. If it's not equal, it's come a long way.
Yes, it's, and I would say that's markedly changed in recent years. They've come a very long way, and I think that leading that way sets a great example for other sports as well, because it's providing that opportunity. It's also then, in terms of in media, being able to recognise that, okay, we are investing in our women's sports, in our elite women's sports. They basically matter to us then. So we're going to have more, I suppose, influence in that respect of stating that the sports are important, or the women in these sports are important to our national teams, to our governing bodies, to who we are and who we're representing. So I think that that's setting a good example for other sports. And like you said, there was a couple of sports that we didn't mention there, but having some lead the way, I think actually really shows the rest of the sporting world that this is now the pathway that we need to be on. That, for a number of years, sort of the women were left behind a bit, and now we need to actually be investing in them, because I think the Matildas or our cricket teams are classic examples where our elite teams are actually more successful in terms of reaching qualifiers in World Cups or winning World Cups in terms of cricket than our men's team. So that investment really needs to be there, so that these women can be professional athletes and be the best that they can be, and then have that sort of almost like returned investment in terms of we're investing in them, so they're going to be almost more successful in that way. And as well, keeping up with other countries that are also investing in their women. There's, in terms of soccer, once again, a number of our key Matilda players are moving in to various countries, whether it's participating in the NWSL or moving now. Sam Kerr is a classic example, going to Chelsea Football Club. So also in terms of, okay, retention of our key athletes, how are we going to keep them within our systems so that we have the best of the best here as well?
Yeah, that's the challenge, isn't it? I think with any country, it's great experience for these elite athletes to play overseas, but
definitely,
they have, again, it's their availability, of course, for the national squads too. And these
Yeah,
women, you talked about Sam Kerr there, of course, Elisa Perry, and is another one in cricket,
yeah,
and on and on. I mean, there's some really real rock stars now in Australian women's sport.
yeah.
These are great role models too. Do you find that there's the accessibility to these athletes that the girls need to, to aspire to be what they can see? That's the connection,
Mm,
isn't it? The grassroots to the elite. It's that accessibility, uh, and the connection
yeah.
up through the ranks there.
Oh, definitely. And I think for a long time that wasn't possible, or the mainstream media, almost it goes back into that whole investment of our elite athletes, for the women's side. That wasn't there, and we didn't have that representation. And the elite sportswomen, I would say, apart from potential Olympic athletes, which obviously only once every sort of 4 years you'd really hear about them, and so it just didn't really exist. Whereas now, with social media, with more advertisement and marketing of our elite athletes, such as Sam Kerr and Elise Perry, there's more faces for younger, both girls and boys, to be able to be familiar with, to be able to have that connection. In terms of social media, they're able to follow them, they're able to connect with them in that way, to see more of their lives as well. So, okay, these people are real people. They're not just, these almost like sporting gods in a way. They're actually real people, real humans. And a lot of the women, what I've found as well, and what I've observed, is will genuinely spend the time with their fans, taking photos, signing autographs, being able to connect to the people that go to the games or even out on the street, which is, I think, really important for young girls and women to be able to, and boys as well, to be able to see these, like visually be able to see these elite athletes be still quite grounded, still quite down to earth, but be amazing at what they do. So therefore, these young people have someone to look up to in a sporting sense, but also more than that. I think that they go, okay, well, hold on, this person has done this and followed this pathway. That's something that I could potentially do. But then I think it feeds more into that connection of, and relatability more than anything, of they are almost just like me. I could follow that opportunity if I wanted to, but what are they doing with their lives outside of the sport as well? And what sort of life are they leading? Which really, I think, even almost like solidifies that connection even more, for young people to be able to look up to, which is really important for, and has been lacking for girls. And I think that even in some of the research that I've done, we've discussed obviously that social aspect for girls to participate, but what about then the role models and mentors? Usually they've been within the club system, or so that they already have to almost be in a club, or within a system that has that opportunity for them to have a role model to look up to, or a mentor to look up to be able to continue that sport. And now they have that opportunity, they have that accessibility, which previously that didn't exist for those elite athletes. So I think that's definitely changed. And that connection can actually be open, and there can be communication back to the fans, to the young people, which is somewhat exciting as well, isn't it, to be able to connect with an elite athlete or your role model. It's fantastic.
For sure. I mean, that's inspiration for young girls right there. And,
100%.
you would hope that that would entice them to stay in the sport. Now, the final topic I want to just touch on today,
Yeah.
Nadia, is the media coverage then that you're getting, like regionally and nationally, both in print and on our screens. Give us a sense of how that's shifting as far as what research you've done reveals.
Yeah, that's really interesting actually, because I think that from some other research that's been conducted in Australia, there's still a limitation of print media women's sport coverage. I think it was from memory, it was around 17% of media coverage is women's sport, which is very low still. It's very, very low. However, I think the problem is for young people in particular to get into watching a particular sport, whatever sport that is going to be, or watching a women's team, they need to already have that connection or have the ability to then be interested in it and follow it already, for them to then continue, almost for them to create that connection with those role models, to be able to follow a team, which these days is a lot more accessible. There's certain apps that you can download to watch, say, for example, soccer, footy, cricket, hockey, whatever. You can watch it, or you can stream these games online. That accessibility is heightened in this day and age, which is fantastic, but I would say that is the prominent way the viewing occurs. So having it just in like mainstream media is still at a lower level. Being able to watch the games, depending on what sport you're watching, depending on where you're living, there will be, usually if there's a game that's connected to that state. So say, for example, in Victoria, it would be football. The local teams or the Melbourne teams are playing, so that'll be on mainstream media. However, then if you're in another state of Australia, it may be rugby that's playing in New South Wales or Queensland, and the accessibility then to watch the women's game with the shortened season and not as many opportunities to watch the game is once again limited. So I think there's still mainstream media in itself could take a step further, and obviously there's so many different facets to that in itself, but there's still a way to go for that accessibility for everyone across the nation, essentially, to be able to watch. And then even in terms of watching sports from other countries or in other countries being played at different times, predominantly that would still occur all online. So you're talking streaming, you're talking apps, anything that sort of has that online capacity is that accessibility. But then once again, those young people or people in general who aren't already invested in that sport, they're not going to be watching it. So what will entice them to get into a sport? And I think that potentially through mainstream media, it needs to be still marketed and advertised further, so that we have that knowledge, the awareness that it's even in existence. Really, I think that's sort of the next steps in the growth of women's sport here, so that people are first of all aware, and then have the opportunity to have that interest, or to be able to follow a specific sport, or whatever their interests are. Really, I would say that's where we need to go next.
Now, what is next then for you, Nadia, in your research and your work in this area?
Well, working on a couple of projects at the moment, and one of them is looking at how we can actually almost pilot or test programs based on some of the research that we've been doing. So we're looking at what sort of language is being used, if the environments, club environments were open, I should say inclusive, and welcoming to girls and women. So now we're going to look at, okay, based on this research that we've done, how can we start to change these environment? How can we start to make it almost a bit more inclusive within sports? So this year going ahead, we have a couple of sports that we're working with specifically to look at that, to say, okay, how can we start to create an environment that will be more welcoming and inclusive for women and girls? And also then what sort of effects does that have on other cohorts as well, such as like the LGBTI plus community, or, and anyone else, how can we start to have almost a downstream effect by working on creating these inclusive environments for girls and women, but inclusive environments for everyone to be able to participate, really. So that's the next step at the moment. But yeah, we have a sport inclusion team here, and we've got a number of projects that we're working on to really just try and get more people involved in sport in general, which is really exciting.
Super. Well, I hope you'll share with us the work that you're doing, because we would love to share it here on Wisp Sports, Nadia.
Oh, I would love to. That would be fantastic.
All right, we'll stay in touch then. And if you want to read the article that Nadia wrote, that is Women's Sport, Why It Matters, you'll find a link in the show notes accompanying this episode on our website at wispsports.com, and along with your social media too, Nadia. So thank you very much indeed for taking the time to come on the show.
You're very welcome, Chris. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And the very best of luck with the work you're doing. Keep it up.
Thank you. And to you too.
Hi, my name is Haley Daniels, and I'm a whitewater canoeist, and I am so proud to be working with WISP as they have elevated the voice of women in sport. We as women need to help each other to continue to break that glass ceiling and to continue to support each other so that we have a future. So I'm extremely proud to be a part of this collective. If you would like to find out more about my sport and how we have triumphed and we are gender equal, you can find me on LinkedIn or on Instagram, Haley Daniels on LinkedIn and Haley Dansky on Instagram. Thank you.
And you'll find a link to Nadia's article on the show notes accompanying this episode. That's at wispsports.com. Just go to the Listen tab at the top of the home page there and drop down to Transcending Sport. And if you'd like to comment on this or any of the other podcasts that we do here at Wisp Sports, we would love to hear from you. You can drop us a line to info@wispsports.com. And of course, you can always follow along and comment on social media at Wisp Sports. Until the next time, thank you for listening and helping us turn up the volume on women's sports.